In the write-up that Jacqueline put out for today, you asked Jacqueline if we're living in a time of shadow, time of darkness, and will the light return? And I thought you've introduced all of this very, very well, because we all know we are living in a time of tremendous darkness, but we also were living in a time of light in the way that we haven't really experienced before. And someone said before about the podcasts, when I was in high school, I never heard anyone talking about the things we're talking about today. And so there are many, many people who are having near-death experiences, anomalous experiences of all kinds, visions and dreams. And it is an incredibly powerful period. But we also know when we look at this darkness and we see some of the plans that some of our species are planning for the future, it can be very troublesome and frightening. But I think we have to remember, we couldn't even see this darkness unless the light were present. The light that we are bringing into our time and space is actually like a magnet drawing out that decay and darkness. Because people are saying every day, what is wrong with the world? We're going through a terrible psychosis. I mean, people are killed every day, shot supposedly randomly, and so on. And it's a horrifying thing. I think we, in our time, are called to stand in this light and look at the darkness within our own species, our own selves, and see, how did it come about and how can it be healed? And so I thought that I would start with what I had written about in Merchants of Light, is that actually our ancestors have known since 40,000 BCE that we are the cosmos. We are the stars, the planets, everything that is cosmic. We are all one. And that is that vast, infinite consciousness. And so around that time, shamanism developed all around the world, around 40,000 BCE. And they had learned how to trigger that release of vision so that we could see who we are. I like how Aldous Huxley had explained the brain, the mind. He said, we are all born in universal consciousness and cosmic consciousness, but there is a valve that limits that consciousness to a stream, so that on a daily basis we can get up, brush our teeth, have coffee, go about our daily lives. And after we do that over and over again, we begin to think, is this all there is to it? And so our ancestors figured out a way to discover, yes, to experience the vastness of who we are. At any rate, this is very important for us to know. And I think it was only in the 20th century that so much of the information about who we are and what our history really was came into our consciousness. I was amazed again and again while doing the research on Merchants of Light to discover what our ancestors did know. They knew so much more than our old story ever gave them credit for. Now, once around 40,000, this was in the cave cultures, and the San Bushmen say they've been around for 65,000 years, and they know how to trigger themselves into experiencing cosmic consciousness. For them, they dance and dance and dance. And they do it together. When someone told them that in India, people sit alone and experience this vast consciousness, they were like, oh no, how sad. Because theirs is a communal thing of dancing and touching, and they can even form this energy of that consciousness into little arrows and throw it at someone, which would kind of ignite that in them. Now, in the cave cultures, they danced, yes, they may have used sacred plants. Sacred plants have been used by shamans for tens of thousands of years. And here it is again, a sacred plant on the earth that will help to release that valve. And of course, we've had a lot of things said about these plants by those who didn't know about the plants. But I was told when I was a kid that there's a plant or an herb to heal everything that might ail us on the earth. And I like to think that. I think we have lost knowledge of that. But what happened with this knowledge so early is that cultures were formed that were shaman, mystic, and if they lasted long enough, they were scientific cultures. Because always when the visionary experiences this vastness, of course, the conceptual brain will want to understand it scientifically. So there's no separation. The temple was the observatory was the temple, no separation that we know today. So cultures were formed out of this knowledge, the shaman, mystic, scientist cultures. And they existed for a very long time. We know that the megalithic culture, after the cave cultures, and old Europe, we now know through the work of archaeologist Maria Gimbutas that it was very much a spiritually oriented culture. And we know the Egyptian now in the 20th century, we know so much more about the intensely beautiful culture in Egypt, the visionaries, the mystics, the scientists. It was so much more than we had thought until we found more artifacts. And then, of course, we now know that the Hebrew First Temple tradition was a shaman mystic tradition from the very incredible Old Testament scholar Margaret Barker. I never knew that before I began these studies. And this is where we have these cultures, but they were suppressed, destroyed to the degree that they could be destroyed. And the first that we know would be the Hebrew culture. The First Temple tradition was destroyed by the Deuteronomist. And what was the center of that whole tradition? The shaman mystic tradition is a tradition of the heart, always consciousness of the heart, the feeling, the love. The Egyptian culture made it very clear that if we cannot ignite feeling and love, that we can't evolve. We can't continue to develop. Life won't develop. So that was in the Hebrew culture, which we knew more about earlier than we did the Egyptian. And the Hebrew culture centered that symbol of the heart and of life giving and life taking. They centered that in the image of the feminine. So the feminine was very powerful in Hebrew culture in the First Temple tradition. But the Deuteronomists burned all of her sacred groves, destroyed the sacred wisdom literature, and now they would have to be ruled by law, although there were Jews who took this wisdom literature to Egypt. But the destruction of it, and again, it never did really come back until Kabbalah. I think that the memory of that First Temple tradition is what we see in Kabbalah. So even later, pre-Socratic philosophers, thanks to Peter Kingsley, we know that they were shaman mystic healers, but that was destroyed and they had to go underground. The Deuteronomists destroyed them, and then the Roman Church carried that destruction through. For instance, it's just very interesting to know that both our religion story has been so distorted because of the destruction of the experience of spirit. If we take just one myth from the Deuteronomist, and that is the tree of good and evil, well, that is an inversion of the earlier myth, which was all over that world. The Sumerians had many, many seals and images of the beautiful tree of life. There was really only one tree, and that was the tree of life and consciousness. If you ate of that tree, you knew what all these shaman mystic cultures wanted us to know, and that is that we are immortal, we are divine, and we are creative. That was destroyed. And God, who now no longer has his feminine counterpart, wisdom, told Adam and Eve they could not eat of that tree. Of course they did. And then they were punished. They were flawed people, no longer worthy of being in the garden. Now, we know this is a false myth, even if we didn't know the archaeology of all of the myths of the tree before. Because one thing I learned from Carl Jung, for which I'm very grateful, is that a sacred text isn't sacred because one decides it's sacred. or a church says it's sacred. It's sacred only when it is structured by the organizing principles of the human psyche. And that's why they're similar all over the earth. And we can tell when there's a false one, because these stories are always for our growth, development, and evolution. And we've had some very false stories. Our religion has been saturated with inverted myths, as the one I've just talked about in Adam and Eve. Now, the Jews wanted to reignite that ancient First Temple tradition, shaman mystic tradition, in the Jesus tradition. Jesus was a shaman mystic, and he actually had rituals that would trigger us into that consciousness, such as the round dance that he taught. And yet that was also taken over when the Roman Church took the Jesus myth. They inverted it and made him a god whom we must follow, something outside of us. But in 1945, we found texts that the church wanted destroyed, and they were burned because it told a different story. And in that, those texts, Jesus makes it very clear who he is. He says, I did not come to save you. I did not come to die for you. I came to help you to remember who you are. And you are the light. You are from the light, and we are all divine. So this was not the Jesus we received from the church. So I just want to try to create the pictures that the religion story that we were all born into, most of us, was that story of we are flawed, we are exiled from the garden, we are sinners, and then we are not God ourselves, but we must follow the God, follow the God. But Jesus himself taught us that not to become the Christ, not to follow the Christ, but to become the Christ. So here we have then a story in which we're not born out of the light and cosmic consciousness, but we are inferior and flawed. And we have to say that that story, whether the technocrats today know that or not, they are still following the Deuteronomist story of a flawed human being, one that needs to be transhumanized or needs artificial intelligence, because they don't know who the human being is, who we are. And we have forgotten because of that false story. But there's another false story that has been tremendously influential. These shaman mystic cultures that I talked about were destroyed, at least on the surface of civilization, but they went underground. So we have the Hermetic text from Egypt, which also developed into alchemy, and we have the Kabbalah and mystic Christianity. These were all based on knowing who we are, that we are immortal, divine, and creative. And that had to be undergrounded. So we didn't know that. And the false story was the Deuteronomist story and also the science story. So when these were undergrounded, these traditions, they actually, I say in Merchants of Light, there were 5 waves of remembering in European history. The first wave was in the High Middle Ages, 700 years after almost total suppression of any other way of thinking about the human being. And that was the most incredible renaissance. And the feminine returns with the heart, with consciousness, with love. And all of the stories are about how to understand her, which is that feminine in each of us, that love and that cosmic consciousness in each of us. And the next was the Italian Renaissance. It couldn't completely do much, but quite a bit in many other areas developed. And then the third one was a Rosicrucian Renaissance. That was in old Bohemia, Prague. And all of these underground traditions were able to go to Prague and actually be active, because Rudolf was a Catholic, but he was interested in all of these traditions. So they really flourished. And there we have scientists, mystics, very creative people all working together in these different traditions, because they knew that in the heart of each of those traditions is the same. It's that we are born out of the light, out of cosmic consciousness, and it is love which heals us. that consciousness and light and love are the same. Well, they lasted 20 years, and the Roman Church found out what they were really doing and destroyed everything, destroyed the cities they came from, destroyed their papers, their research. And then after that was the 30 Years' War between Catholics and Protestants. After that, in 1660, some of the scientists who were in Prague, scientists and mystics, were also the scientists who formed this Royal Society for the Study of Science. But they were completely suppressed in the study of anything but matter, only the physical world. The church would not allow any kind of mysticism to take place. I'm sure the church didn't realize what they were doing, but they just knew that they wanted followers for the church, and these mystics seemed to go their own way. But that suppression of scientists, in which they could only study matter if they wanted to live and if they wanted a reputation. And we know that in our time that scientists have to be very careful about what they say about anything that might be beyond matter because of this very destructive tradition. So what did that give us? That gave us the science story. Science in which there's nothing but matter. We're a fluke of nature. There is no meaning and no purpose. And when we're dead, we're dead. So we were all born into this heritage of the religion story and the science story, both severely suppressed and reduced and limited. And yet they have dominated throughout most of my lifetime and still do to a degree. But in the 20th century, something just miraculous began to happen. Scholars began to discover these cultures, and quantum mechanics was discovered. I mean, how could such a science develop? It was almost like it came full circle. And here we have quantum physicists who know that there are other dimensions of reality. I love how the Buddhist and a writer, Paul Levy, says, we together collectively dreamed quantum physics to heal ourselves, because we won't believe anything if science doesn't support it. I mean, at least we have a hard time doing it. And now we have a science that can support this. So I'll just tell my story about being born into this world. The science story scared me to death. I was afraid it might be true. The religion story wasn't enough for me, although I loved going to church and hearing the Sunday school, I should say, hearing these wonderful stories about a man who was kind and loving and honest and had integrity, was ethical. But I couldn't believe much. I couldn't believe a thing. I wanted to know it. And there was no way to experience it that I knew. So there had been in the past, but the churches got rid of those ways of experiencing this. And I think today in our time, we're going to find many ways to trigger that valve to open so we remember and experience who we are. But so I really couldn't accept either story, but I didn't know what to do. What can I do? How can I find out what's really going on in this world? So I went to college. That was my only path. And there, of course, I was bombarded by the science worldview, which, of course, you believed in if you were intelligent, we were told. Not believed in, you had to know it's absolutely accurate. And then the religion story, well, in the university, that was pretty much dismissed anyway. But I studied religions, and I felt there had to be more. Well, when I got out of college, I started teaching, and one of the things, I taught comparative literature, but I also taught myth and symbol and fairy tales. And of course, I had met Jung by that time. In the last year of college, I was dating a man who had just become a minister. He had a new parish, and he had a party for his friends. And I was invited. I went with him. And that evening, all of the men, they were there with their girlfriends, but all of the men had gone to Andover Newton Seminary. They just graduated. I think that's now connected to Yale, I'm not sure. And they were brilliant. They were talking about science and mathematics and Carl Jung and the psyche and the individuation path. I had no idea what they were talking about, but I kept quiet. I listened carefully. And after they had gone, I said to my friend, who is Carl Jung? And so he took me into his library, and I borrowed several books. And the one I remember most is Modern Man in Search of a Soul. And I thought, well, that's me. I'm in search of a soul if there is such a thing. So I began reading Jung, and he really became my inner guide. In fact, I had a dream that I was out in the forest. It was dark, and I saw a little cabin. And I went to the door. I saw light inside, and I knocked on the door. And Carl Jung opened the door, and he had silver hair, a red for the rubedo and alchemy, I think, robe. And I saw all of the books lined up, all these ancient texts about soul. And he invited me in. And so as I stepped across the threshold, I tripped, of course, and flew in on my belly. But I thought, okay, I don't know anything, but I showed up and I'm ready to learn. So the next scene is we are sitting between the ancient forest and the cemented patio, and we're talking and we're learning. So he had a great effect on me. And when I taught the fairy tales and myths, the students and I, it was in the 60s, everybody was searching for something. And we could see very clearly this organizing principle working in all of the myths and fairy tales, that there was a meaning beyond, and that there was a phase of life in which we experienced that vastness of who we are. Well, I went back, got my doctorate, and then I decided, I still haven't had my own experiences. Not really. I had dreams. I listened to my dreams. I wrote my dreams down, but I wanted that experience of this vast consciousness. And I thought, well, I'll go to Peru and I'll work with shamans for a while. I did. And I did have some interesting experiences there. When I came back, one thing I learned there is that I don't want anyone on the outside. I have to do this myself. I have to awaken my inner shamaness if I'm going to experience anything. I came back and I began having a lot more dreams and visions. And then within 2 years, my mother was killed as she crossed the street instantly. And then 1 year later, our only child, our son Pishti, was killed in a second car accident. And then 2 years later, my husband was killed in a third automobile accident. And I must say that after our son's death, Istvan and I, my husband Istvan, had extended experiences with him. He wanted us to know he was fine. Everything was just wonderful. He was still creating. And he also wanted us to know what the earth is going to be going through in the next decades. And he wanted to remind us, as though we really knew it. We all know these things. We just have to be reminded. But before I tell you some of the important visions that we had with him about that, I want to just go back just a little bit, because I think that we all three knew that this was going to happen on an unconscious level. When I was pregnant, I had a very powerful dream that I could only understand fully when I put all of the pieces of the years together later after he died. But I was out in the country, and I saw my mother's old schoolhouse, and I went inside. It was just a one-room schoolhouse, and I went upstairs, and upstairs I saw that there were Chinese lanterns, and one of them had a light within it, was pulsating. And I knew that was my child that was going to be born. And the old man was there, and he began to smoke a pipe. And out of the smoke was a painting that was facing me. And from the top corner, I saw a young man come in very quickly, go down to the bottom, walk straight across the canvas. And he came to a gate that said death on his side, but life on my side. He walked through it. He had a sack on his back with just a little bit in it. And then he immediately turned left and started walking up to the mountain. Then he went out that same corner in a total bright white light. But the old man was still there. And I realized that he is that soul that created Pishti. And Pishti came into time and space and went out of time and space, but he was still there. But it was really hard for me because I didn't quite know what to do with it at the time. And then when the 2 years after I returned from Peru, I had many, many dreams that he died. And yet it would be like, oh no, it's not my son, it's someone else's son. But I grieved the whole time. as though it were my son. And that lasted for 2 years, and I tried to look at them symbolically. But then my son, Pishti, he was almost 12, and he told me his dreams and would write them down and draw them or what. And I was vacuuming the house, and then he said, "Oh, Mom, I just remembered I had a really big dream last night." So we sat down, he told me, I wrote it down. I later saw after he died that he had written it down and had drawn it. And he said, "I'm up above a hospital looking down at my dead body." And he described the intensive care ward that he was in, where the wash basin was, the gurney. And when we were called that he had been in an accident, when I walked into that room, it was exactly as he had drawn it. And he said, then I was in a space of darkness, and for just a short time. And then I was like in a horseshoe of boys. And I was at the top of the horseshoe. There were 4 boys on my left, 4 boys on my right. And there was an eternal fire in the center. And then across from that, I saw another boy, just an aura of that boy. And we were all waiting for him to return, because we knew that when he arrived, I would be complete, because 10 is a number of completeness. And he said, "What do you think it means, Mom?" I said, "Oh my." Well, we tried to look at it symbolically, but of course later I could see it precisely. And of course 10 is a number of completeness. I don't know whether he knew that, but he knew it in the dream. And then in the year of his death, he had a dream of a crash, of going back and forth. I was with him. He would get into his body, pull the blanket over, and the light would then just shoot his body out into the universe. He said, "I passed planets and suns and moons so fast that they popped." But then he would come back into his body, until he heard someone say, "He's been reduced to a vegetable permanently." And he said, "I looked at the body and I knew that body wasn't me." And so then he went back out into the universe. It was almost like a rehearsal. And then 2 weeks, also in that dream, there were candles lit everywhere, and there was chanting. And he said to me in the dream, "Mom, can you hear my chanting? Can you hear the chanting?" And I said in the dream, "Yes, we can all hear your chanting in our sleep." And the first vision I had with him was introduced by this vast cosmic chanting. And then 2 weeks before his accident, my husband, who was not interested in all of this stuff. He was very polite, very open to whatever I was interested in, but that was not his interest. When I came back from Peru and tried to tell him about a vision I had, he was reading LA Times. I don't know why I picked that time to tell him, but at any rate, I could see he wasn't paying attention. And when I called him on it, he said, "It's true." He said, "I know you, and I know that's what you experience, but I've never had anything like that happen to me. I have no idea how to relate to it." And I thought, well, that's honest. Most of us don't. And so anyway, he was to change. He didn't know that. But here he was working in his office here at the house. And suddenly he saw Pishti's car up on the side of the freeway, and his body was superimposed on it. And he knew he was dead because it was 2 different dimensions. And suddenly he said, "Oh, that's right, Pishti. It's almost time for you to do this." And that was so shocking to him. But Pishti said to him right away, "That's right, Dad. I'll be out of the house for a little while." And then Istvan was completely unconscious. And it didn't come back until the call. We happened to both be here when the call came. And he was in the intensive care ward for 13 days. And it was then a week afterwards, he did return, and in our visions. And it's interesting that when they told us he would not make it, they would take him off all of the machines. It was exactly the same day that my mother had been killed a year before, and the same hour. These synchronicities we don't know what to do with, but I've always felt we hold them, and then maybe there'll be other things that will connect the dots. But then after his memorial, he did return so fully. When my husband had the first vision with him, he sat up on the side of the bed and he said, "I will never look at the world in the same way again. I had no idea what you were talking about. And it was the visions, he realized in these visions that he and Pishti were of the same soul. And I had had that experience before either of them died, that they were of the same soul. And I thought, well, strange, I never thought of anything like that. And when I came home, I said to my son, I thought, I'll just try this out and see how they respond. And when I said that to Pishti, I said, you know, I had an experience in which you and your dad were of the same soul. And he kept painting something. He said, yeah, sounds about right. I got the same response from my husband. It was like they were unconscious, but responding out of that other knowledge. At any rate, this was incredible for Istvan because he experienced so many lives together. Sometimes they were one, sometimes they were two. When they were two, then Pishti would tell him what's going on and talk to him about it. But he saw this vastness of the universe, and he realized how he'd lived. As I said in Miracle of Death, it's that we had lived in 1 square inch and called it reality. It was so much more than that. Then when we were in the hospital, there was one day that the doctor came to us and said, well, your son may die within the hour. There are 3 things we can do, and we're doing them right now. And so our friends were around, but Istvan and I were alone together. And I just took hold of his hand, and I suddenly just felt like a shock going through my whole body. And I looked at him quickly. I thought he's going to have a heart attack. And he did look disturbed. And I became the strong one. You know how it is in partnership. Sometimes you shift these things. And I said, Istvan, if we're called on to do this, we can do it. And he didn't tell me until later, but he said that he thought he was going to have a heart attack. And he said the energy was so intense and it built up to a point, but instead of a heart attack, it just blew out into images. And he saw Pishti sit up in bed and take a dove with a ball of fire in his beak and put it in his heart and lie back down. And then he was at Machu Picchu. He'd never been there, but he was there in the vision. And he saw Pishti standing on the top of the small mountain. And he was reaching up with the left hand and holding out. He was looking up to the heavens, holding out his right hand and making a bridge between the 2 worlds. Istvan said that it was that from the very beginning of the visions, it was as though he was in another realm. It was quiet and peaceful, and he had no worries whatsoever. And he said, when I was with Pishti when he did that, I didn't know whether he would live or die. What I did know is that there's nothing but life, and that I could never be separated from him because the love joined us forever. And that worry about dying wasn't with him. Well, those were some of the visions we had before. After he died, we had so many and long involved visions, and we recorded everything that happened right afterwards because I knew we couldn't remember, and we knew we were involved in something big. And so when I wrote the book, I used those recordings to be sure I could be as accurate as possible. All of them are in the book, Miracle of Death, but one was Istvan's vision. I had had the vision of Anubis or the Jackal before any of them died. And the Jackal in Egyptian mythology is a being, Anubis, that has that energy within him to take in a lot of negativity, a lot of darkness, and transform it into life. So the Jackal eats decayed food, and then it's a living substance for the Jackal and turns it into life. And so the Jackal had been a very major symbol in my life in the last 2 or 3 years. And so Istvan had then an image, a vision with the Jackal, talking about this, about the decay, the darkness in the world. And then Pishti was there, and he said, Dad, I want you to go to the I Ching and look up this hexagram. And he gave it, he said, start from the top. You know, usually when you throw the I Ching, you start from the bottom. He said, start from the top down. It's straight, broken, broken, straight, broken. And so I ran into the study and I found the I Ching, went back, found that hexagram in the back. And then when I turned to it, I was just shocked. So I went over and sat on the bed with him and I said, Istvan, this is it. And it was 18 Ku, work on what has decayed. And Pishti said to his dad, Dad, read this carefully. This is your work, meaning ours, and it is the work of the earth, to work on what has decayed. And I said, well, how did you remember the hexagram? Oh, that's easy, he said, it's ML. I said, ML, where'd you get that? And he said, Merchants of Light. And I thought, Istvan would sometimes, his first language was Hungarian, he'd sometimes come with funny statements, and I thought, Merchants of Light. Well, I found out later that Merchants of Light were also active in some of these Renaissance periods, which I didn't know before. But at any rate, when we talked about Merchants of Light, he said, well, Merchants of Light, ML, is for an energy field that we have drawn to the earth now because of our longing to heal this darkness, this decay. It's an energy field. This energy field allows beings to be born who will already know what we're trying to figure out. And also, it will allow all of us to make contact with that other dimension much more easily. This light, it's a well-developed, highly structured energy field that makes this possible. And I thought it was so powerful. That was such a powerful vision for him and also for me, but also the fact that this working on what has decayed is what we must do in our time. And we know the decay is out there, the darkness is out there, but that we have this light, this energy field out of which we can work with it. And so the last vision that I want to tell you is one that I had actually before any of them died. I had come back from Peru. I was with two other friends, and we had a ritual for our children and the children of the world. And I felt it and I saw it. While we were in that meditation, there was a huge disc that came through the glass doors and hovered over my head, and a huge disc. And out of the center of it, just swirling out of the center, came a woman with a four-cornered hat. It was white satin and was dressed to the waist in white satin. And then she spiraled out of the center of it into my crown chakra and into my heart. And she began to sing. The energy was so strong. I was sitting up straight, and I don't sing, but it sounded pretty good. And she was singing, and she said, "We are the light. We are the light circling round your planet. Can you feel us? Can you feel us? We are here to be with you all three. Can you feel us? We are the light." And I knew so much during that time that she didn't say. I just was, I suddenly knew so clearly that there had been light around our planet for a long time, and they were waiting until the energy, the longing, and the love could pull that light and anchor it in the planet. And there was a time when I heard it was almost like a mechanical voice that said, "We are ready to connect to your planet." And I thought, what is that later? But that's what it was. And the other two didn't know what I was experiencing, but we were all three embraced and sitting where we'd been meditating. And we all felt that come down, and we knew that light had connected to the planet, and it came through us, and we could help to anchor it in the earth. And I know now that people all over the planet have probably experienced that, because in one way or another, that anchoring of the light into the earth, because we loved, that was the energy necessary to anchor it. And the energy was so, well, first of all, before she left, she said, "You have joined to yourselves this day all those on your planet who are creating worlds of peace and love." And I think that's what we do. We are all connected, united, and that creates a tremendous energy, a tremendous strength out of which to create and to love. And it was very clear, love is what will heal this darkness. But that vision was so powerful. And then she left, and I experienced them going on. But I was changed for sure, because I was still in doubt at that time. But I kept saying to myself, this is one vision you cannot say you made up. No way. This is realer than real of anything I'd ever experienced. And it was interesting that later I read William Irwin Thompson, and I'm just going to read it because it ties in so well. When consciousness is deeply rooted in the heart, the individual is open to and united with a supramental energy that guides each person on his or her own unique evolutionary path. It's beyond, his book is beyond religion, because of course when we connect with that, that is our spiritual connection and journey. And each of us, for each of us, this, he says, is the next stage in our human evolution, a stage beyond all religions. It is now more accessible through the descent of the supernatural, supramental. And I think that's what the merchants of light were saying. And that's why the hexagram started from the top. It's this energy that we have drawn to us, to the planet. And it's been going on a long time, but now is a time we're actually rooting it in the earth. Mystics at the Aurobindo ashram say this supramental, that manifestation began its process of emergence and development of the earth in 1956. Well, mine was probably 1988 or 89, but there's only now in the universe. So I think that at different historical times, people were experiencing it. And even if they didn't experience it, it was happening through them, through the love that they were experiencing. And what was so powerful to me was that to really realize that it is the power of love that will actually heal this darkness. Of course, we have to know what it is. We have to work intelligently with it through our very precise knowledge of how it came into being. But it is through that feeling, loving heart that the planet can be healed. It was also kind of interesting that when Pishti was a little kid, he got into a thing. He just drew this one picture for a long, long time. And it was the earth with a kind of layer of darkness around it. And after that, it was light, and there was a beam of light coming to the earth. And it was so interesting that in one of Istvan's visions, he said, Pishti said they will catch the earth in this beam of light. I don't know what that means. Maybe it's just symbolic. But I think that the most important thing is that I was so energized by that consciousness. I knew that this was cosmic consciousness filled with it, this disk, and it could be individuals, it could be all one. And that the woman who came into my heart, certainly she had to limit that consciousness to something that I could take in. But I was changed by it. And I think what changes all of us is the love. And there were for so many centuries, exceptional people were able to draw that energy from the earth up through the root chakra into the crown chakra and connect, that had seemed very important work, and that this was another phase of the work. And so maybe we can talk about some of the things or have questions.
Yes, if you have a question, you can go over to reactions all the way to the right of your bottom of your screen, and you can put your hand up and we can ask questions of Betty. I would like to mention that you did have a vision, I believe it was with the Jackal, of a cauldron, and yes, how the Jackal was going to help with that cauldron. And it's kind of like what we're all going through right now. It's something that was very, very symbolic. And go ahead and tell us about that vision.
Yes, that was really a powerful dream,
Yep.
actually, that I was somewhere in space looking at the Earth, and I saw something. I kept sort of zooming in on a place at the North Pole, and here were a bunch of jackals, and Pishti was one of the jackals, and they were stirring this cauldron, stirring it to keep it from spilling over and destroying the Earth. And so I'm looking at them, and I said, what is this? What? And shit, they said, unclaimed shit. And it was very clear that we don't have to go up to the North Pole and claim the whole cauldron, but we do have to go up and claim our own. And it was just really clear that the jackal in each of us must take the shit that belongs to us and transform that decay into life. But yes, they were sort of humorous, but deathly serious as well. But I think that is true. And that's one of the things I liked about Jung's work, is that we needed to work on our own shadow rather than projecting it out and seeing the darkness outside of us. It's take that darkness and see what that darkness was within us and transform it into light. So that was certainly a very powerful dream. And certainly the jackal is an energy that's working in all of us. We have that ability to transform the worst darkness into light through the heart consciousness of love. I often think, so often I fall into this too, thinking, I wish I could do more, or people think, well, I'm not really. We are. When we love anything, everything, everyone, that love anchors that light and helps to dissolve the darkness. So we are all extremely creative. I had one vision in the very early stages in which I was back in Peru, and I was on a gurney, and 4 people were pushing that gurney over to Huayna Picchu, and I thought, this is the sacred mountain of the old woman of the mountain. I will enter that mountain and shamans will teach me. Well, I got up to the entry of the mountain and they stopped. And I thought, am I not going to be let in? And suddenly it's that complete knowing, I am the mountain, the old woman of the mountain. I am those shamans. I am it. It's just that powerful understanding that each one of us is it. Years ago, I would hear Alan Watts say that, and I didn't quite know what he meant. But when I had that experience, we are everything.
And we can try so hard here. And we just need to know that maybe some other people will come around at some point with some of these things that are happening.
What do you mean, Jacqueline?
Just some of the malignant things that are happening that will be a wake-up call for some people that don't care and don't realize that they could make a difference.
Oh, true. Every single one of us makes a difference. And I think too of the people who see the human being as flawed and needing to be those who feel they should take evolution in their own hands and transform us with artificial intelligence and nanotechnology and so on. They don't know the vastness of who we are. Well, just how did they come about? They came about because of that terrible suppression of all that we are for centuries. They are the product of our suppression of the sacred, the true sacred story of who they are. They don't know that. And so the prayer has to be that they too will be able to know and use that incredible intelligence they have in a way to open the natural intelligence of who we are, that we have the potential for cosmic consciousness. We don't need, except to help in various kinds of ways, we don't need it to transform us. So I think knowing how that darkness came into being and the need to control the world, that's always part of the illness, that if we don't make contact with the inner divinity, then we want to control the whole thing. The Deuteronomists wanted that, the Roman Church wanted that, the scientists got into that mode. That seems to be the other side of the illness, that is the side of not having experienced who we are. So we have to have a kind of love for them and a very intelligent way of combating it.
If anyone has a question for Betty, please go over to the right-hand side where it says reactions and raise your hand, because we have I see Dorothy Walters. Dorothy, do you have a question for Betty?
I do. And my question, Betty, has to do with the fact that some years back when you were finishing, I guess it was Merchants of Light, you and I met through Andrew Harvey.
Yes, we did.
And Andrew was interested, as I, of course, was very interested in the whole phenomenon of Kundalini and what it is doing to our consciousness in this present world. Now, and he even persuaded you to add what was almost a footnote to your book about Kundalini, because he felt it was incomplete until it added that information. And of course, I was delighted, because my life dedication has been to Kundalini. I serve Kundalini, which is to say, I want to make it better known in this universe and in this planet. Now, at the time, this is my question. At the time, you were not especially familiar with Kundalini as such. You talked all around it. You talked all about many things that Kundalini people would probably claim originated with it. But my question is, are you more familiar with it now? Do you see its happenings occurring more now? Is it more a part of your own personal perspective on what is happening, or not? Are you just as you were and say, well, that's something some people fiddle with?
No, I never had that attitude, Dorothy. Long before I met Andrew or you, I knew about Kundalini, and I had taken at least partially a route through Muktananda for a while. And but my journey was in a different way. In the book itself, I had finished the book when we met, and it was ready to go to press, and that's why I had only one page that I could use to put in what Andrew Harvey wanted me to put in, and that was about how Kundalini is increasing in modern times. That I was
I can't hear very well. Yes. How Kundalini does what?
That it's increasing in our time. The experience of Kundalini.
It seems to me.
Yes, that's what Andrew and you wanted me to do. I had one page and I did it.
I know.
That's all I had. I mean, it was lucky that we had one page left because it was at the printers. No, in the book, I talk about Kundalini in the San Bushmen, for example. They are really experts in Kundalini. And it also was, as I say in Merchants of Light, true for the Egyptians. We see that the serpent is risen and is on the forehead. The snake is on the forehead of the pharaoh. They knew Kundalini. And it also would appear that that was true in the First Temple tradition of the Hebrew mystics. And it is also true with the Shaman-Mystic, the pre-Socratic people.
It's all over.
And I'm just saying of the ones that I talk about in the book. So yes, I did know about it. I had not experienced it myself, and I did not know the degree to which it was increasing. And I'm very happy to know to the degree that that is true. That's wonderful. So I added it to the best way I could of the modern time. That's what Andrew wanted me to put, how it was in this time increasing in our culture.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Because for me, Kundalini is ecstasy. That's what it brings to the person who is experiencing it in its full glory, and everything is adjusted just right. Do you talk about ecstasy in the book? Do you feel that it's part of the awakening experience?
Of course it is. Of course it is, yes. I think any degree of experience with that vastness is ecstasy. Absolutely.
Literally in the body, ecstasy in the body, not in the thought, not in the words, not in the concept, but ecstasy flowing fully throughout the body.
I think it flows now fully. No, I think that it's varying degrees and depending upon the experience and the intensity of the experience.
I agree.
But ecstasy, if you have that sense of ecstasy, you pretty much think of it as all-consuming. But I think that there's still degrees of ecstasy.
I agree.
And I would like to take that a little bit farther, and that is that we talked a little bit at the beginning of the program about the Bigelow Awards that just were financial awards and notifications that people were writing some very beautiful things that have not been published yet, specifically because Mr. Bigelow asked about it. And we would like to say that all types of awakenings and spiritual transformative experiences and near-death experiences, as well as classical near-death experiences, seem to be documented and coming out almost weekly now, much more than they ever were before. So something must be happening.
I certainly think that there's no question about the fact that it's pervasively happening in many different forms. Many of the people who have the near-death experience, as they say in Britain, we call it actual death experience, that they have that experience of love that is so profound that it is itself, it is ecstasy, that feeling of love that is fills the whole being. And many of them who have had those experiences in near-death experiences talk about them and write about them. But I think there are all kinds of things. All kinds of things are happening, many different ways of experiencing who we are, the divine.
Do we have any other questions or comments that people would like to make to Betty while she's here? Betty, are you working on any more books or blogs or articles, journal articles?
I am. Right now I'm working with a man from Japan on a book. He had profound experiences with John Dee and the Monas Hieroglyphica. And so it will be about the understanding and visions of our ancestors. I don't know exactly which form it's going to take, but we're working on that. And then some other things myself. So yeah, it seems, I always think, well, I'm through now, but then I'm not. There's always something else. Like you, Dorothy, you're always writing another book, right? Another book of poems.
And Dorothy also is writing her, put all of her blogs and helping people try to make some kind of sense of their Kundalini awakening, which can be very disruptive for some people. She's put those all into a book called Kundalini Wonder.
Oh, that's great.
So, and it's a helping book.
Mm-hmm,
so that and like many of our books, so that you don't think you are psychotic or mentally ill or schizophrenic or whatever because you've had this very mind-blowing experience.
Yes. Sometimes the energy is so tremendous. I was very happy that my husband was also experiencing the other dimension because it helped me to know I wasn't losing my mind.
No, it's great that it all came together, and then he also died in an automobile accident. Did you have any visions on that coming down, or was that a total surprise?
Well, about 6 months after Pishti died, Istvan began to have visions of his own death.
Oh.
And he kept thinking, well, that's just symbolic death, because he was opening now to the world that I had known about and he hadn't. In other words, he was changing. He was being reborn again, in a sense. But I mean, they were so specific. But we just kept looking at them symbolically. And the day, no, it must have been, well, it was on a Sunday, maybe a week before he was going to go to Hungary. He had business there as well as his family. And he had a vision that morning, and it was, well, it's time for you to die, Istvan. And he fought it and fought it and fought it. And they said, no, it's time. And he said, well, don't you think, talking to the spirit, and he said, don't you think I should have the say when it's time? And then the spirit said to him, no, who else would have that say? Of course. And it was just this loving feminine presence. And I remember he said, well, I'm just get up and go to the bathroom. And so he went to the bathroom, came back. Oh, there she was. She was still present. And she said, no, Istvan, it's time. Well, you know, we even looked at that symbolically. And yet when he went to Hungary, he was killed in a car accident, just immediately killed. And I went back and listened to that. And I thought, all of these, you know, we looked at all of these symbolically, and I think it's good, because that way we could still live with joy, not worrying about death. But at the same time, when you go back and you have all the pieces, you think, why didn't I see that? But I think we did on an unconscious level. Somehow we knew. And so he did. And there were just so many synchronistic events. I did see in a vision after it, I saw how the accident happened. And so it's, yeah, I think we knew, and that helped us to live with what had happened.
Have you had any after-death communication or after-death messages from Istvan?
You know, I feel that both of them, in fact, I had one experience in which they were kind of both, they always come together because they are one soul. And it was kind of laughing, like, we're with you. When you love, there's no separation. We're in your heart. You couldn't get rid of us if you wanted to, kind of thing, you know. And I feel that it's a different form than it was right afterwards, because we needed that direct communication. But now I feel that they are part of all the work that I do.
And they might be here right now.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much. And again, Betty, we are very grateful to you for taking your time on a Sunday afternoon to speak to us. We love it very, very much.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline, for having me. Thank you very much.
And don't forget her 2 books, Merchants of Light and The Miracle of Death. They're available through bookstores or on their website of Kamlak, KAMLAK.com. See you next time.
Thank you. It was fantastic. Thank you so much.